In a bustling Lagos market, Abeni was a hard-working young woman who sold catfish and ran a small food stand, feeding the community with her delicious meals. Despite her humble means, she was deeply in love with a man named Femi, a handsome but jobless young man with no clear direction in life. Abeni didn't mind Femi's lack of employment. She believed that, with God's help, he would find his way. She took it upon herself to care for him, often spending her hard-earned money to buy him clothes, food, and anything he needed. When Femi's landlord threw him out of his apartment, Abeni didn't hesitate to invite him to stay with her. But her roommate, Shola, opposed the idea, reminding her that they barely had enough space for themselves in their small one-room apartment. Unfazed by Shola's protests, Abeni decided to rent a tiny apartment for Femi on her own. It cost her most of her savings, but she was happy to do it for love. Shola thought she was foolish for supporting a man who couldn't take care of himself, but Abeni didn't care. She loved Femi with all her heart and believed in his potential. Abeni's love for Femi was tested one evening when he told her about an opportunity that he claimed would change their lives forever. Femi explained that a friend had promised him a job overseas where he could earn enough to support them both and start a new life together. Abeni's heart sank at the thought of him leaving, fearing he would never come back. But Femi reassured her, promising that he was doing this to make a better life for them both, and that once he was settled, he would bring her to join him abroad. The only obstacle was the cost. 8 million naira was needed for travel and initial expenses. Femi had no family to turn to, but he looked at Abeni with pleading eyes, saying that she was the only person he could count on. Despite the doubts swirling in her mind and Shola's stern warnings, Abeni was determined to help Femi achieve his dream. She tried to borrow money from friends and relatives, but no one could lend her such a large amount. Finally, she sold her family's land and her entire catfish business, giving up everything she had worked so hard for, just so Femi could pursue his dreams. When Abeni handed over the 8 million naira check to Femi, his face lit up with gratitude and surprise. He hugged her tightly, barely believing she would go to such lengths for him. "Abeni, how did you even get this money?" he asked, overwhelmed. Abeni smiled, though a pang of sadness clung to her heart. "I sold my family's land and my catfish business," she said softly. Femi's eyes widened in disbelief. "Babe, how will you manage without it? That's your inheritance." Abeni held his hands tightly and said, "It's because I love you, Femi. I believe in you. Things will get better for both of us, and I know you won't forget me." She was determined to start from scratch if it meant Femi would succeed. Femi knelt down, thanking her repeatedly, swearing that he would repay her love and sacrifice. When Shola found out about Abeni's sacrifice, she was furious. "Abeni, are you serious? You sold your inheritance, everything you had, for a man who isn't even your husband," she scolded, pacing around their cramped room. "What if he leaves you? What if things don't work out? You didn't think this through." But Abeni, ever hopeful and stubborn in her love, brushed Shola's warnings aside. "Femi loves me, Shola. He won't forget what I've done for him. He's going to make a better life for us," she replied confidently. Shola sighed, shaking her head in frustration, unable to change her friend's mind. As Femi prepared for his journey, Abeni was filled with a mix of hope and dread. She promised herself that they would soon be reunited and start a beautiful life together. Watching Femi leave was painful, but Abeni's heart held onto his promises as he boarded his flight, leaving her in Nigeria with dreams of a brighter future. Months passed, and Abeni waited patiently for Femi's calls and messages. At first he was enthusiastic, sending her updates about his new life and expressing how much he missed her. But gradually, his calls became less frequent, and his replies shorter. "I'm at work," he would often say, brushing off her attempts to connect. She told herself he must be busy, that things were difficult abroad, and that he needed time to adjust. But the loneliness weighed on her, and she began to miss the comfort of their simpler times together. One evening, Abeni received a call from Femi, and though things had been strained between them since he moved abroad, she still felt a spark of joy every time they spoke. She missed him deeply, and hearing his voice brought back memories of the love they once shared. They chatted about his job, his life in Canada, and the challenges she faced back home. Abeni told him about the food stall she was trying to set up again, and Femi listened, occasionally adding words of encouragement. But in the middle of their conversation, Abeni heard a woman's voice in the background calling Femi "darling." Her heart skipped a beat, her mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? Why was she calling him darling? She immediately asked, "Femi, who was that? Did I just hear someone call you darling?" There was a brief pause on Femi's end, and she could almost sense him scrambling for an explanation. Then, in a calm voice, he replied, "Oh, that? Don't worry, babe, that's just my boss. Here in Canada, it's common for people to call each other darling or dear. Everyone is just really friendly like that." Abeni felt a twinge of doubt but tried to dismiss it. She wanted to believe him. "Are you sure, Femi?" she asked quietly, still unsure. He chuckled, trying to ease her worries. "Of course, Abeni. There's nothing to worry about. That's just how people talk here. You know I'm here working for us, right?" Though not entirely convinced, Abeni decided to trust him. She forced a smile, hiding her uncertainty. "Okay, if you say so," she replied, trying to convince herself that everything was fine. She clung to his words, not wanting to believe that there could be someone else in his life. For now, she pushed the doubt aside, choosing to believe in the man she had loved so fiercely. To survive, Abeni started looking for small jobs around the market, but it was a struggle. She missed her catfish business, her regular customers, and the independence she once had. Her friends noticed her absence from the food stand, and they began asking her what had happened. Abeni felt too embarrassed to tell them the truth, so she lied, saying she was taking a break. After a year and 6 months, Abeni's worst fears began to unfold. Femi was thriving in his new life abroad, posting pictures of luxury items like Rolex watches, designer clothes, and flashy clubs. She felt her heart sink each time she saw him enjoying life while ignoring her messages. Desperately, she reached out to him, asking for just a small amount of money to help her restart her business, but he told her he didn't have any. It hurt her deeply, seeing the man she sacrificed so much for flaunt his wealth without a thought for her. Abeni confided in Shola, who tried to be supportive but couldn't hide her disapproval. "Abeni, I warned you about this. You gave up everything for him, and look what it's gotten you. Now you're begging for what was once yours," Shola said. Abeni couldn't argue. She sat there, tears streaming down her face, reflecting on her choices and wondering where she went wrong. Every day, Abeni would send messages to Femi, hoping he'd respond with the same warmth he once had. But soon, Femi blocked her entirely, cutting off any means of contact. Devastated, Abeni was left with nothing but memories of the promises he made. She felt abandoned, but she knew she had to move forward. Gathering the little money she had left, she started hawking food on the streets, working tirelessly to regain her footing. Life was hard, but Abeni refused to let despair win. She hoped, against all reason, that Femi would come to his senses and return to her. Her spirit grew tougher, and she found a new strength within herself, focusing on surviving each day in a city that had shown her both love and betrayal. Life had become an uphill battle for Abeni, but she persevered, hawking food in the hot sun every day to make ends meet. One afternoon, as she was hurrying across a busy street with her food trays balanced on her head, a motorbike came out of nowhere. She tried to step aside, but it was too late. The bike struck her, sending her sprawling onto the hard pavement. Her food containers scattered, and people rushed to her side, lifting her up and helping her to a nearby bench. Pain shot through her ankle, and she could barely stand, her legs trembling from the shock. Abeni's friend, Shola, soon arrived after hearing about the accident. She was horrified to see Abeni in such a state, bruised and shaken. "Abeni, this is terrible. Look at you. Are you all right?" she asked, worry etched on her face. Abeni nodded, trying to smile despite the pain. Her thoughts immediately drifted to Femi. She thought if he saw her like this, he might finally understand how much she was suffering and reach out to her with the care he used to show. "Shola, please, take a picture of me," Abeni said, clutching her side. Shola looked at her, confused. "Why, Abeni? You need rest, not pictures." But Abeni insisted, explaining that she wanted to send the photo to Femi. "Maybe if he sees what I'm going through, he'll call. Maybe he'll realize how much I need him," she said softly, her voice tinged with both hope and sadness. Reluctantly, Shola took a photo of Abeni, capturing her in her injured state, with visible bruises and the sadness in her eyes. Abeni sent the photo to Femi, along with a short message hoping he'd respond with the concern she longed for. Hours passed, but her phone remained silent. Days followed, and there was still no response. Femi didn't call or even acknowledge her message. The silence hurt more than any injury. Abeni realized that the man she had sacrificed everything for had drifted further than she had ever imagined. One evening, as Abeni headed to the market to buy ingredients, she spotted a familiar figure standing by a sleek white Benz. Femi. But he looked different, more polished, confident and content. Beside him stood a beautiful woman, laughing as they talked. Abeni's heart pounded as she watched from afar. She wasn't sure if she should approach him, but the woman beside her noticed her stare and commented, "That fine man just got married, oh, lucky girl." Abeni's world crumbled. She wanted to confront him, but instead she turned and walked away, her eyes filled with tears. When she got home, she told Shola everything. "He's married, Shola. I saw him with another woman," Abeni said, her voice shaking. Shola hugged her, trying to offer comfort, and suggested that maybe it was a mistake. But deep down, Abeni knew what she saw, and the pain of betrayal left her shattered. Determined to confirm her suspicions, Abeni returned to the market every day, hoping to see Femi again. Weeks passed with no sign of him. She decided to track down the woman who had given her information about him before, hoping for more details. When she finally found the woman, she asked if she knew anything about Femi and his new wife. The woman hesitated, eyeing Abeni with suspicion. "Who is he to you, young lady? Are you planning to cause trouble in his marriage?" Abeni forced a smile, reassuring the woman that she just wanted to know the truth. With some reluctance, the woman revealed that Femi and his wife visited her family every Sunday evening. Abeni decided she would see him one last time, hoping to find closure. On the next Sunday, Abeni disguised herself as an elderly beggar, covering her face with an old scarf and dressing in tattered clothes. She waited outside the gates of the house, sitting quietly by the side. Eventually, a luxurious car pulled up, and Femi and his wife honked for the gateman to open the gate. Abeni stood up and approached the car, her heart racing as she held out her hands, pretending to beg. Femi's wife muttered something about beggars, while Femi instructed Abeni to come to the window for money. But Abeni stood her ground, her eyes fixed on him. Annoyed, Femi got out of the car, and as he handed her a note, Abeni grabbed his hand tightly. Femi looked down, shocked, and as she slowly removed her headscarf, his face went pale. "Abeni, what are you doing here?" he stammered, his eyes wide with guilt and fear. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Is this what I deserve for loving you, Femi?" Femi stood there, speechless, as Abeni's words hung in the air, filled with heartbreak and betrayal. His newly wedded wife, noticing the tense exchange, stepped out of the car and looked at the scene with confusion. "Babe, who is this beggar, and why are you talking to her like this?" she asked, her tone a mixture of irritation and curiosity. Femi fumbled, trying to compose himself. "She's just a beggar. Let's go inside," he said hastily, hoping to brush off the situation. But Abeni wouldn't let go. She tightened her grip on his hand and looked directly into his eyes. "So, this is what you think of me now, Femi? A mere beggar?" The hurt in her voice pierced through him, and his guilt was written all over his face. Femi's wife looked even more confused, watching her husband's obvious discomfort. "What's going on here? Why is she saying these things?" she demanded, her suspicion growing. At that moment, Femi knew he couldn't escape. He looked down, unable to meet Abeni's eyes, as shame filled him. Seeing her husband's reaction, Femi's wife grew impatient and demanded an explanation. "Femi, I deserve to know what's going on here. Who is this woman to you?" she asked firmly. Realizing there was no way out, Femi finally admitted the truth. "Abeni, she's someone who helped me when I had nothing," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Abeni, now with tears streaming down her face, spoke up. "I gave you everything, Femi. I sold my land, my business, my future, just so you could have a chance at a better life. And now you stand here, pretending you don't know me." Femi's wife gasped, horrified at the revelation, and looked at her husband with disgust. "You lied to me, Femi. You told me you came here with your own money, that you were self-made," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. Just then, her parents stepped outside, alarmed by the commotion. The scene was chaotic, with Femi trapped in a web of lies and betrayal he had spun himself. As the truth unravelled, Femi's wife and her parents listened with shock and anger. They were horrified to learn that he had manipulated Abeni, the woman who had sacrificed so much for him, just to chase his own selfish dreams. Abeni couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. "Femi, you promised we'd build a life together, that everything you were doing was for us," she said, her voice breaking. "But all you wanted was my money and my love to get you where you are now." Femi looked away, unable to face her. His wife's expression shifted from shock to fury. "If you could betray a woman who helped you become the man you are today, what would stop you from betraying me too?" she spat, her anger cutting like a knife. Femi's wife turned to her parents, declaring, "I cannot be married to this kind of man. I refuse to stay with someone who deceives and uses people for his own gain." The parents nodded in agreement, disheartened by Femi's actions. Femi's carefully constructed life was beginning to fall apart before his eyes. With his wife's declaration, Femi's marriage of barely a month came crashing down. She stormed off, dragging her parents with her, leaving Femi standing there in shock. The neighbours gathered, watching the unfolding drama, whispering about Femi's deception. Abeni stood quietly, absorbing the reality of the situation. The man she had loved and trusted with her life had betrayed her in the worst way possible, and now she was left with nothing but the pain of his actions. Femi finally turned to Abeni, his eyes filled with guilt and remorse. I'm I'm so sorry, Abeni. I was wrong. I didn't deserve your love or sacrifice, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Abeni looked at him, her expression cold. Sorry doesn't change what you did, Femi. You took advantage of my love and ruined my life, she replied, her words sharp. She turned to leave, determined to move on and rebuild her life. She realized now that Femi was not the man she thought he was, and that her future lay in her own hands, not in the promises of a deceitful lover. As Abeni walked away, the weight of everything she had been through settled heavily on her shoulders. Her heart was shattered, but she knew she had to find a way to move on from Femi and the pain he had caused her. She returned home, where Shola waited, having heard about the dramatic confrontation from neighbours. Shola embraced her, offering comfort in her own blunt way. Abeni, I'm sorry you had to go through all of this, but maybe now you'll see that you deserve better, she said gently. Abeni nodded, wiping away her tears. She knew it was time to rebuild her life, even if it meant starting from scratch again. Her love for Femi had cost her everything, but she was determined not to let it ruin her future. With Shola's support, she decided to revive her food business, pouring all her energy into making a fresh start. In the days that followed, Abeni worked tirelessly to set up a small food stall, slowly regaining her confidence. She returned to the market, where familiar faces greeted her warmly, glad to see her back. She started small, preparing simple meals and selling them to regular customers, gradually rebuilding her reputation. The pain of Femi's betrayal lingered, but with each passing day, she grew stronger and more resilient. Her hard work paid off, and soon she was able to expand her menu and attract more customers. Though life was challenging, Abeni found solace in her work and the support of her friends. She realized that she didn't need anyone to save her. She was more than capable of standing on her own. Abeni's food stall was beginning to gain a reputation around the marketplace, where she served fresh, homemade meals to the locals. One afternoon, as she was wrapping up a busy lunch hour, a young mechanic boy approached her. Polite and shy, he introduced himself as Jide and explained that he had come to buy food for his boss, a man named Chucks. Abeni prepared the meal with her usual care, wrapping it neatly before handing it over. She thought little of the exchange until Jide returned the next day with the same request. Curious, she asked him about his boss, and Jide shared that Chucks had been so impressed with her food that he wanted more. As time went on, Jide became a frequent visitor, always buying food on behalf of Chucks, who eventually decided to visit her stall himself. Chucks was a tall, confident man with a friendly smile that put her at ease. He complimented her on her cooking and told her he admired her dedication. It wasn't long before Chucks became a regular, stopping by her stall to chat whenever he had time. Their friendship grew naturally. Seeing Abeni's potential, Chucks offered her advice on how to upgrade her business, encouraging her to improve her setup and add more variety to her menu. He even helped her practice English, correcting her grammar gently and showing her new words. Abeni, who had never seen herself as anything special, began to feel a newfound confidence. Chucks would occasionally take her out to experience new places, making her feel valued and appreciated. As their bond deepened, Chucks one day confessed his feelings, admitting that he wanted more than just friendship. Abeni, however, was hesitant. Her heart was still wounded from Femi's betrayal, and she feared opening herself up to someone again. She explained her feelings to Chucks, who listened patiently and assured her that he respected her decision. He continued to support her without pressuring her for anything more. When Abeni confided in her friend Shola, Shola encouraged her to give Chucks a chance, reminding her that he was different from Femi. "He's helped you grow, Abeni," Shola said. "Can't you see how much you've changed? He truly cares for you. He isn't Femi." Eventually, Abeni decided to let go of her fears and allowed herself to start dating Chucks. The relationship brought joy to her life that she hadn't felt in a long time. They shared laughs, dreams, and plans, and with each day her trust in him grew. One evening, Abeni decided to surprise Chucks with a visit. She arrived at his home unannounced, her heart light with anticipation. However, her excitement quickly turned to shock when she saw another woman in Chuck's living room. The woman looked at her with disdain, crossing her arms as she said coldly, "Stay away from my man. He belongs to me." Abeni's heart shattered. She felt a rush of betrayal and hurt, just like she had with Femi. Unable to confront Chuck's, she left in tears, retreating to her home, where she vowed to keep her distance from him. Maybe love wasn't meant for her, she thought. She couldn't bear the thought of being hurt again. Days passed, and Abeni focused solely on her business, trying to put Chuck's out of her mind. On her birthday, she was at her stall when she saw Chuck's approaching with a large bouquet of flowers. He looked regretful, and as he reached her, he handed her the flowers and spoke in a gentle tone. He explained that the woman was his ex-girlfriend, who had been struggling with an illness. Out of compassion, he had offered to help her, not realizing she still harbored feelings for him or had her own intentions. "I would never hurt you, Abeni," he said, his eyes sincere. "I'm truly in love with you, and I want you to be a part of my life." Moved by his honesty and the courage it took to come forward, Abeni forgave him. As they walked back to her stall together, Chuck surprised her further with a special gift. A brand new car, a testament to how much he believed in her and her dreams. The car symbolized not just his love, but his faith in her journey and success. Lesson: trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, but with patience, understanding, and honesty, true love can overcome obstacles. Abeni learned that love is not without challenges, but with sincerity and support, it can be a beautiful source of strength and growth.